Today I discussed about the poetics of Aristotle. Firstly, introduction to the author. Aristotle is a towering figure in ancient Greek philosophy who made important contributions to logic, criticism, rhetoric, physics, biology, mathematics, metaphysics, ethics, and politics. He was a student of Plato for 20 years but is famous for rejecting Plato theory for theory of forms. He was more empirically minded than Plato and Plato's teacher Socrates. Aristotle's poetics seeks to address the different kinds of poetry, the structure of a good poem, and the division of a poem into the component part. He defined poetry as a medium of imitation that seeks to represent or duplicate life through character, emotion, or action. Aristotle defines poetry very broadly, including epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, poetry, and even some kinds of music. According to Aristotle, tragedy came from the effort of a poet to present man as nobler or better than even they are in real life comedy on the other hand shows a tower type of lower type of person and and reveals humans to be worse than they are in average. Epic poetry, on the other hand, imitates noble men like a tragedy, but only has one type of matter, unlike tragedy, which can have several and is narrative in form. Aristotle lays out six elements of tragedy. First is a plot, then second one is character, third one is diction, thought and spectacle, and the song. Discuss that plot. Firstly, plot. Plot is the soul of a tragedy because action is paramount to the significance of a drama, and all other elements are subsidiary. A plot must have a beginning, a middle, and the end. It must also be universal and significance, have a determined structure, and maintain a unit of theme and purpose. Plot also must have contained element of assessment and reversal, or recognition and suffering, and reversal is an ironic twist or change by which the main action of the story comes full circle recognition. Meanwhile, is the change from ignorance to knowledge, usually involving people coming to understand one another's true identities. Suffering is a destructive or painful action, which is often the result of a reversal or a recognition. All three elements collapse to create catharsis, which is the engenderment to fear and pity in the audience, pity for the tragic heroes, light and light and fear that has fate might befall us. When it comes to character, a poet should aim for four things. First, the hero must be good and must manifest moral purpose in his speech. Second, the hero must have a property or manly valor. Thirdly, the hero must be true to life, and finally, the hero consistent, and tragedy and epic poetry fall into the same categories. Tragic and epic poetry fall into the same categories as simple, complex, driven by a reversal and recognition, ethical, pathetic. There are a few differences between tragedy and epic. However, first, an epic poem does not use song or spectacle to achieve its catharsis effect. Second, epic often cannot be presented as a single setting, whereas whereas tragedy are usually able to be seen in a single view. Finally, the heroic measure of epic poetry is hexameter, where tragedy often use other forms of meter to achieve the rhymes, to achieve the rhythm of different character of speech. Aristotle also lays out the element of successful imitation. The poet must imitate either things as they are thought to be, or things as they ought to be. The poet must also imitate in action and language, preferably metaphors and contemporary words. Errors come when the poet imitates incorrectly, of those destroys the essence of poem, or when the poet accidentally makes an error. Error means a factual error, for instance. Aristotle does not believe that factual error sabotage the entire work. Errors that limit or compromise the unity of a given work, however, are much more consequential. Consequential, and lastly, I discuss about the conclusion about the poetics. Aristotle concludes by talking the question of whether the epic or tragic form is higher. Most critics of his time argued that tragedy was for an inferior audience that required the gesture of performers, while epic poetry was for a cultivated audience, which could filter a narrative from through their own imagination. In deeply, Aristotle notes that epic recitation can be made by overdone gesticulation in the same way as a tragedy. Moreover, tragedy like poetry can produce its effect without action. Its power is in the mere reading. Aristotle argues that tragedy is, in fact, superior to epic because it has all the epic elements as well as spectacle and music to provide an indulgent pleasure for the audience. Tragedy, then, despite the argument of other critics, is the higher art of Aristotle. So I want to stop this. Thanks for listening me.